Okay, let's unpack something that feels like a bit of a riddle, really. It's at the heart of everything.
Yeah.
How does all the stuff we see and feel, solid objects, even fleeting thoughts, how does it actually arise from something that seems to have no form at all?
Right. It's a mind-bending idea.
It really is. But what's fascinating, I think, is how this exact same question keeps popping up in totally different fields.
Yeah. What strikes me is that this isn't just abstract daydreaming or something.
No.
We've looked at scientific research digging into the literal birth of the universe,
Yeah.
and philosophical ponderings on the very nature of reality, and ancient spiritual wisdom talking about the void,
And they all seem to point back to this.
all converging on this central mystery. Form emerging from formlessness. It's like a thread running through so many ways of trying to understand existence.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're sort of embarking on an intellectual adventure, if you like.
Yeah.
Our mission is to try and grasp how this seemingly undefined state could be the source of, well, everything. And maybe even uncover a few insights that might resonate with you directly.
Sounds good. So where do we begin? Maybe the biggest picture we have. The cosmos itself.
Makes sense. Start big.
Modern cosmology points to the Big Bang, right? Everything we know expanding out from this incredibly dense, hot state. It's the universe itself bursting forth from something that seems like a singularity.
And here's where it gets really intriguing for me. Some theories propose that even before the Big Bang, there was this quantum vacuum.
Right, not just empty space.
Exactly, not empty in the way we normally think of it. Like Lawrence Krauss's idea. Could these tiny quantum fluctuations, these energetic blips within this vacuum, spontaneously just give rise to entire universes?
Like a cosmic lottery.
Yeah, where universes are the jackpot, and then you have Stephen Hawking's work on quantum gravity, trying to understand gravity at the tiniest scales. Could our whole cosmos have just flickered into existence from a state of, well, nothing?
But then the question becomes, is that nothing, actually everything just waiting? Pure potential.
That's the kicker, isn't it? It raises that crucial question about what we even mean by nothing.
Uh-huh. In this context, it seems less like a total blank void and more like a field just brimming with unseen possibilities.
Okay, so that's one angle. Now, shifting gears completely, what about ancient Eastern philosophies? What do they tell us?
Because this isn't just a 21st century scientific puzzle, right?
Not at all. For millennia, Eastern traditions have been grappling with this. Like, take the Tao in the Tao Te Ching. It's described as unnameable, this formless origin that gives birth to all forms, the ultimate source. But you can't quite pin it down or define it. It's like trying to grasp water. It's essential, but trying to hold on to it too tightly.
And it slips through your fingers.
Yeah.
Precisely.
And
And then you've got the Buddhist concept of sunyata, often translated as emptiness.
which sounds kind of negative, maybe?
It can, but it's not really about everything being meaningless or nihilistic. Instead, it points to the interconnectedness of everything, the lack of a fixed, independent self or essence in anything.
Okay, break that down to.
Think about, say, a table. Is it inherently a table? Or is it just wood, screws, maybe certain design, and then our human label that makes it a table for us?
Ah, I see. So it's empty of some fixed, essential tableness.
Exactly. The key insight there is that our labels and our fixed ideas about things are what create this false sense of separation. Realizing this interconnectedness can lead to a less rigid way of seeing the world.
That's a powerful shift in perspective. And then Hinduism, right? Vedanta philosophy talks about Brahman.
Yes, Brahman as the formless ground of all being, the ultimate reality. And then there's Maya,
Maya, the illusion.
the illusion. Yeah, the illusion that the forms we perceive as separate are actually just different expressions of this one unified formless reality. Like we're all waves on the same ocean, appearing distinct for a moment, but ultimately just water.
It really makes you wonder what would be left if you could somehow peel back all the layers of our perception.
Like a thought experiment.
Yeah. Imagine if you could strip away all the names we give things, all the concepts we use to understand experience. What would remain?
Maybe just pure, unfiltered experience before our minds jump in and start imposing form and categories.
Okay, so we've looked at the cosmos, ancient wisdom. Now let's zoom right in, dramatically, to the physics of form itself, quantum field theory.
Yeah, this offers a really different way of looking at things. What's fascinating here is the fundamental shift in what we consider real.
How so?
Well, instead of thinking of tiny particles like little billiard balls as the basic building blocks.
Which is what most of us learn in school.
Right, quantum field theory says it's actually quantum fields that are fundamental. Think of these fields as invisible underlying realities that fill all of space like an unseen ocean.
Okay, so where do particles come in?
Particles then are just temporary disturbances or excitations within these fields, like waves popping up on that ocean.
Wow, so the universe isn't really a collection of tiny marbles.
It's more like an ocean of potential. And what we perceive as solid objects are just temporary ripples in these underlying fields. It fundamentally changes how you think about reality itself.
And we can't forget the Higgs field in all this. That's the one they talk about giving mass to particles. Yes.
That's the one. It's often described like an invisible cosmic syrup or treacle. Some particles interact with it more strongly.
They feel more resistance.
Exactly. They experience more resistance, and thus they appear more massive to us. So form, or at least mass, arises from these interactions within these otherwise formless fields.
It's all interactions.
It seems to be.
Yeah.
And building on this idea of hidden underlying realities, you have David Bohm's concept of the implicate order.
Boom, right. Implicate and explicate order.
Yes. He proposed that the visible world we experience, which he called the explicate order, is just the unfolded manifestation of a deeper, more fundamental reality, the implicate order, which is all enfolded and hidden from our direct perception.
Like potent.
Kind of. Imagine swirling ink in water. Before it spreads out, the pattern is enfolded, implicit in the swirl. Bohm suggested the universe is like that our visible reality is just one way that deeper potential unfolds.
He used the analogy of a hologram too, didn't he?
He did, where the entire image is somehow encoded in every tiny part of the film, but you only see the complete 3D picture under the right kind of illumination, like a laser beam.
So maybe our everyday reality is just one way of illuminating this deeper, formless potential. That's quite a thought.
And this naturally leads us into a truly mind-bending area, the role of consciousness in shaping reality.
Ah, the measurement problem. The double slit experiment.
The classic example. What's just so bizarre is that whether a tiny particle, like an electron, acts as a spread-out wave of probability, or a definite point-like particle, seems to depend on whether we're measuring it, whether it's being observed.
Yeah, it collapses the wave function, but what observes it?
That's the million-dollar question. Some interpretations, like Eugene Wigner's, even suggested that consciousness itself is necessary for this quantum collapse, for the wave of possibilities to solidify into one definite particle.
So our awareness could actually be playing a crucial role in bringing form into being.
It's a controversial interpretation, but a persistent one. And going even further, you have thinkers like Bernardo Kastrup proposing a philosophical position called idealism.
Which basically says?
Essentially, it's the idea that mind or consciousness is the fundamental reality. And what we perceive as the physical world is actually a manifestation within this mental realm.
So form arises from a universal mind, and we're like localized whirlpools in it.
That's one way to think about it, yeah. Our individual consciousnesses are like localized expressions of this larger mental reality.
So if consciousness does play this kind of role, maybe even a little bit, it suggests that we, as conscious beings, might be actively participating in creating the forms we experience every single moment.
That's the profound implication, isn't it? Our thoughts, our awareness, might have a much more direct impact on the world around us than we usually think.
Wow. Okay, let's try and bring this down to earth a bit. To our own level, the human experience, how does this idea of formlessness show up in our daily lives? Maybe creativity.
Yes, that's a great example. Think about that moment when a brilliant idea just seems to pop into your head.
Yeah, seemingly out of nowhere.
Right. It's like pulling something fully formed out of a blank space, out of the void in your mind. Where did that sudden inspiration actually come from?
It feels like it arises from some formless potential within us.
It does. And consider Csikszentmihalyi's concept of the flow state.
Oh yeah, being in the zone.
Exactly. That feeling of being completely absorbed in an activity where your sense of a separate self seems to just dissolve and creation happens almost effortlessly. It feels like the idea is flowing through you rather than you consciously constructing it piece by piece.
That makes me think of that beautiful line from Rumi. You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop.
Lovely. It speaks exactly to this vast, formless potential residing within each of us.
Is there a practical takeaway there? Something we can try?
Maybe next time you're feeling stuck creatively or you're searching for an answer, just try pausing. Don't actively try to force a thought. Just listen. Listen to the stillness inside.
Be open to what emerges.
You might be surprised by what comes out of that seemingly empty space.
That ties into the idea of spiritual awakening too, doesn't it? This sense of returning to a fundamental source. Different traditions describe this in various ways.
They do. In Christian mysticism, for instance, Meister Eckhart spoke of the ground of the soul.
The ground of the soul.
A place of profound unity with the divine that transcends individual form. And Zen koans those paradoxical riddles.
Like, what was your face before your parents were born?
Exactly. They're designed to break down our rigid attachment to our formed identity, our ego, and point towards a formless preconceptual self.
And you hear accounts from people who've had really deep experiences, sometimes maybe through psychedelics, describing a feeling of ego death.
Yes, emerging with an infinite shapeless awareness, a temporary dissolution of that sense of separate self.
It really makes you ponder. Who are we beyond the labels, beyond the roles we play day to day?
If our individual sense of I can temporarily disappear in deep sleep or deep meditation, what is that fundamental essence that remains? Is there something unchanging beneath the flux?
Okay, so if our truest nature is in some sense formless, how do we bring that understanding into the world of form? How can this knowledge actually impact our daily lives in a tangible way?
Well, I think the key is starting to recognize that this formless essence isn't just an abstract idea, but the very wellspring of all manifestation. It's the foundational reality from which everything arises.
Like the quantum field we talked about earlier.
In its own language, quantum mechanics does hint at this shared energetic space, this underlying field of potential, yeah. And while we might grasp this intellectually,
Reading about it, listening to this?
right, the real power, I think, lies in cultivating a direct experience of it in our daily lives, seeing it not just as a concept, but as a living reality.
It's fascinating how, throughout history, humans have tried to capture this formless truth through all sorts of forms. Philosophy, religion, art, literature.
Absolutely. It's as if we're all collectively pointing towards something that ultimately transcends any single expression.
Like maps pointing to the territory.
Exactly like maps. These are guides, pointers towards a direct experience, a direct witnessing of the formless. But the risk is always mistaking the map for the territory itself.
And when we try to fully contain the formless within a form, a definition, a belief system, it inevitably loses something, doesn't it? Some of its inherent vastness and dynamism.
It has to. This connects with the idea that maybe true insight, true creativity doesn't really originate from the ego, from that part of us trying to control everything.
But from somewhere deeper.
From a deeper, more intuitive place. Maybe a kind of spiritual guidance, if you want to call it that. And in that context, things like money, status, they become tools, means to an end, not the ultimate goal in themselves.
So creating from this state of formlessness, it sort of transcends those normal ego-driven desires, the ones rooted in a sense of lack or an insatiable craving for more.
I think it can, yes.
Yeah.
Because those drives are ultimately based in the world of form, in believing that the forms are the ultimate reality, and that acquiring them will bring lasting fulfillment.
But form, as we've been discussing,
By loosening those rigid boundaries of form in our own minds, by learning to tap into that deeper source of creation, it's about aligning ourselves maybe with a higher purpose, a potential for what some might call our highest contribution or service.
Okay, so how do we actually live from this understanding of the formless? It can sound a bit abstract when you're dealing with, deadlines and traffic and daily life.
A crucial aspect, I think, is learning to embrace uncertainty. It sounds simple, but it's profound.
Because if everything is in constant flux,
Arising from and dissolving back into formlessness, then clinging tightly to rigid expectations and fixed outcomes is almost guaranteed to lead to frustration and suffering.
that makes perfect sense. Alan Watts had that wonderful quote, something like, "The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance."
Beautiful. It's about learning to flow with the formlessness, with the constant process of becoming, rather than resisting it.
You see that in other areas too, like maybe startup culture, where innovation often seems to emerge from the unknown, from a willingness to experiment and adapt quickly.
That's a great practical example. Or consider the Taoist principle of Wu Wei.
Effortless action.
Often translated that way, yes. Like a river naturally finding its course down a mountain without forced exertion, acting in alignment with the natural flow of things.
So on a really practical level, maybe incorporating just a short daily practice, like what some call beginner's mind or don't know mind.
Yeah, maybe just 5 minutes each day. No specific agenda, not trying to figure anything out, just being present with the open potential of the moment, noticing what arises without judgment.
It sounds like it's about recognizing the illusion of control, our tendency to get strongly attached to forms, our careers, our identities, our carefully constructed plans.
And understanding that impermanence, or anicca as it's called in Buddhist teachings, is the fundamental nature of reality. And that clinging to these temporary forms is often a primary root cause of our suffering.
Even on a physical level, right? Modern physics tells us that even apparently solid objects are mostly empty space at the atomic level.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the form we perceive as so solid and concrete is actually incredibly dynamic and fluid underneath it all.
So ultimately, true liberation, maybe a sense of real freedom, comes from loosening our deep identification with these fleeting forms.
Realizing that we are fundamentally more than just our current manifestation, our body, our thoughts, our roles. This allows us to engage with the world of form with perhaps more lightness, more playfulness, more creativity, without being rigidly defined or limited by it.
Okay, now let's try and connect this to our inner world more directly. How might this formless thought actually manifest into the concrete forms of our psychological experience? There's some interesting work around universal mind, consciousness, and thought.
Yes, what's particularly insightful there, I think, is the proposition of a fundamental process. How this formless energy and intelligence, let's call it universal mind for now, empowers consciousness, our basic capacity for awareness. In thought, our ability to create mental content, images, concepts, how these three work together to generate our entire subjective experience. It suggests our inner world isn't just passively reflecting what's outside.
But it's actively constructed from within.
Exactly. Actively constructed. And this model talks about three distinct levels of thought that actually precede our conscious psychological experiences. The first being proto-thought.
Level I, proto-thought, what does that mean?
Well, it concerns our very initial contact with the world through our senses. The usual understanding is, light hits eyes, sound hits ears, and that info goes straight to the brain.
Right. Direct transmission.
But this perspective proposes something more nuanced, that there's already a subtle, almost formless level of thought operating that shapes how we even perceive that sensory input in the first place. It's like our minds are filtering and interpreting right from the get-go before we're even aware of it.
Wow. So even before we consciously register seeing something or hearing something, there's already a subtle layer of thought mediating it. They mention Glasser and Power's idea of intensity versus sensation.
Yes, highlighting how our interpretation kicks in almost instantaneously.
Yeah.
We don't really experience purely unfiltered reality. We experience reality already tinged by this proto-thought.
And Pat's research about the nervous system scanning for what it's prepared to find.
Exactly. Or Hunt's assertion that there's no physical universe independent of our thoughts about it.
Right.
These ideas all point towards this very deep, virtually imperceptible level of thought that profoundly influences everything we experience through the senses. Level I thought shapes our sensory landscape without us even noticing.
Okay, then comes level 2, interpretative thought. This is where the brain makes sense of that already mediated sensory info.
Precisely. Based on our past experiences, our memories, our learned reflexes, our cultural conditioning. Drawing on Bohm's idea of the constant flux of awareness, thoughts are rising and dissolving like patterns in a stream. Level 2, I thought, involves the brain selectively focusing on certain aspects of that incoming, already filtered sensory input and interpreting it within our existing framework. Oh, that shape is a car. That sound means danger. That person looks friendly.
And most of these interpretations get stored away.
Stored in memory, yes. Shaping our beliefs, our assumptions, our conditioned responses. Some thoughts get tagged as more important than others.
And then finally, level 3, intentional thought. This is where our emotions and moods come in.
Right. Our emotions and moods, which are themselves heavily influenced by the interpretations happening at level Y and 2.
It's all connected.
Deeply connected. These feeling states then directly impact our intentions, which ultimately lead to our actions and behaviors out in the world.
So every behavior, even stuff we do automatically, starts with some kind of intentional thought, even if we're not consciously aware of forming the intention.
That's the idea, however fleeting or unacknowledged it might be. And of course, our actions then ripple outwards, affecting the external world, influencing other people, which starts the whole cycle anew in them and reflects back to us.
So the really key takeaway here seems to be that thought in these different subtle forms appears to precede everything in our experience. Proto-thought before perception, interpretative thought before emotion, intentional thought before action.
It paints a picture of this fundamental inside-out process. Formless thought taking concrete shape within us and literally creating our moment-to-moment experience of reality.
And just realizing this, understanding this inside-out nature of our psychological experience, that can have profound implications for mental well-being, right?
Absolutely. Understanding that our thoughts are not just passive reflections of reality, but active creators of our experience. That alone can significantly raise our level of self-awareness and maybe foster a greater sense of inner peace.
It's like, if we truly get that our thoughts are just thoughts, they're mental events, not necessarily objective truths or accurate reflections of what's really happening.
Then we don't have to take them quite so seriously.
Yeah. We don't have to get so entangled in their content, especially the difficult or negative ones. We can learn to observe them with a bit more detachment, allow them to flow more freely without grabbing onto them so tightly.
Exactly. And there's this idea that when our personal minds become quieter, when we're not so caught up in the constant chatter,
We can access something else.
we create space to access a realm beyond our personal conditioned thinking, a source of deeper insights, intuition, maybe what you could call wisdom, arising from a different level of consciousness. Thinkers like Bohm and Deepak Chopra have talked about this inner silence as a wellspring of creativity and potential.
This reminds me of the research on the brain's default mode network, the DMN.
Yes, the DMN.
It's most active when our minds are wandering, not focused on a specific external task. And it seems to play a key role in self-reflection, integrating information, maybe even creativity.
And interestingly, disruptions in DMN activity have been linked to certain mental health challenges, like depression or anxiety.
So, does quieting the mind relate to this?
Well, the suggestion is that when we intentionally quiet our minds, maybe through practices like mindfulness or meditation, we might actually be allowing our brains to function more optimally, to spontaneously tap into a deeper source of well-being and creativity, perhaps even aligning with that universal mind energy we talked about.
And the core idea seems to be that when the noise of negative or unproductive thinking subsides, healthy thinking naturally comes to the surface.
It's like the sun is always shining behind the clouds. When the mental clouds part, clarity emerges. Healthy functioning is the default state, but it gets obscured by our habitual thinking patterns. People like Sydney Banks talked a lot about this.
It's fascinating, too, how even the science of epigenetics is starting to support this mind-body connection.
Right, showing how our environment, our behaviors, and yes, even our thoughts and beliefs can actually influence how our genes are expressed. Bruce Lipton's work is well known here.
So our thoughts can have tangible biological effects.
It certainly seems that way. And this whole inside-out realization, this understanding, it's like introducing a new kind of vibrant energy into our psychological system. It can potentially counteract old patterns of stress or deterioration and promote a sense of rejuvenation and growth. Ilya Prigogine talked about open systems and self-organization, and Caroline Eyes connects energy and health. It's all pointing towards this potential for transformation through awareness.
Shifting from being reactive to being more creative with our lives.
A more open, dynamic, and creative engagement with life, exactly. Less driven by past conditioning, more open to present potential.
So, wow, taken quite a journey, haven't we? From the scale of the cosmos, down to quantum physics, through ancient philosophy, into the human mind and experience.
And it all seems to point back towards this fundamental, ongoing dance, this interplay between form and formlessness. Structure arising from potential, dissolving back into potential.
And perhaps the most profound insight isn't just to intellectually understand this intricate dance,
But to actually be the dance itself.
yeah, to recognize our own inherent, inseparable connection to that formless source, the source from which all things arise and to which they eventually return.
As Lao Tzu beautifully put it, to the mind that is still, the whole universe surrenders. It really makes you wonder.
Have you touched the formless? Have you
Yeah.
had glimpses of that stillness, that potential?
We'd genuinely love to hear your own thoughts and experiences on this whole topic. Please do share them with us if you feel inclined.
Absolutely. And until our next deep dive, stay open, stay curious, and always remember, you are, in a very real sense, the universe itself continuously unfolding.